Welcome back to Conversations That Awaken by Joe Bandra. If you've been with us since episode 1, thank you for taking this journey with us. Over the first 10 episodes, we've questioned many of the assumptions most of us inherited without ever examining them. We've explored the nature of reality, the illusion of separation, the origins of belief, the question of God, the self-organizing universe, the fact of being, the limits of language, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. You may have noticed that we've returned to some of the same ideas more than once. That wasn't by accident. Some truths cannot be understood by hearing them only once. They must be approached from different angles, examined through different lenses, and reflected upon until they become your own direct insight. Repetition is not about convincing you, it is about inviting you to observe more deeply. Our purpose has never been to give you another belief system. It has always been to encourage you to examine, question, investigate, and ultimately understand for yourself. Because borrowed knowledge is information. Direct experience, on the other hand, is transformation. If you're joining us for the first time, we encourage you to begin with episode 1. Each conversation builds upon the previous one, forming a journey from questioning the world to questioning the one who believes they are separate from it. So wherever you are in the world, thank you for listening. Take a moment to become fully present. Set aside, just for a little while, everything you think you know. And together, let's question everything. I am Kim. I hope you had the opportunity to read or listen to Finding Neve by Joe Bandra. The name Neve, heaven spelled backward, symbolizes a journey of self-discovery, an inward return to the source of true happiness. It is an invitation to look beyond the stories we tell ourselves, rediscover our authentic nature, and awaken to the peace and wholeness that have always been within us.
So, imagine opening a book, right? And on the very first page, the author just straight up tells you that the universe was constructed out of, violent, bloody chaos.
Right, just total destruction.
Yeah, exactly. But then you flip the page, and a completely different author is telling you, no, that's wrong. The universe was actually spoken into existence with, pure, intentional peace.
And, most people would encounter that and just throw the book against the wall, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
They dismiss the whole thing as this chaotic web of contradictions.
Oh, yeah. But the thing is, for thousands of years, humanity has taken this vast, entirely fragmented collection of ancient literature.
Spanning centuries.
Centuries, written by dozens of authors across entirely different cultures, languages, and geopolitical realities.
And we have just desperately tried to force it into the shape of a polite, continuous novel.
Which is a disaster. We expect to, open page 1, meet a protagonist, follow a logical plot, and just assume the rules of the universe remain static.
Right, like we're waiting for the author to tie everything up in a neat little bow by the final chapter.
Exactly. And when you apply that expectation to the biblical library, the entire reading experience it becomes a complete catastrophe of comprehension.
It really does.
Mm.
Which is why we need a completely different approach for this deep dive.
We do, because it's the absolute definition of using the wrong tool for the job.
Yeah.
It's an organizational failure on the part of the reader, because it isn't a novel. It is a dense historical mosaic.
I love that phrase, a dense historical mosaic.
Right. It is a multi-generational argument about the nature of reality itself.
And attempting to read it as this flat, continuous narrative is exactly why so many people either discard it entirely as primitive nonsense, or
they do the opposite, right? They weaponize it.
Yes, they weaponize it by flattening its really profound nuances into this rigid, lifeless set of rules.
Which is tragic.
It is. So today, we are bringing you along on a deep dive into a huge stack of source material, specifically focusing on how author Joe Bandra analyzes this ancient library.
And to be perfectly clear right up front, our goal for this deep dive is not Theology 101.
Definitely not.
We are not approaching this text as a religious rulebook or, a list of ancient dogmas. Bandra's entire approach is about unpacking this material to spark what he calls conversations that awaken.
Conversations that awaken. That's That's the core mission here for you listening. We want to abandon the novel approach entirely and instead view this text as a map of human consciousness.
But to navigate a map that complex, we really need a new organizational tool.
Right, because we have to figure out how to categorize the conflicting information we're actually looking at.
So, to provide that cognitive scaffolding, Bandra introduces this framework he calls the 6 lenses.
The 6 lenses.
Yeah. The premise is that if we want to understand the underlying mechanisms at play in this library, we have to analyze the text simultaneously through 6 specific vantage points.
And those are science, philosophy, psychology, mysticism, metaphysics, and everyday living.
Right. Every single passage demands that you ask which lens the author was originally looking through.
I actually find it really helpful to visualize this problem physically. Like, think about walking into your local massive public library.
Okay, picture that.
If you pulled a book from the ancient legal archives and then immediately pick up a book of erotic poetry and then like a book of political history,
Right.
and you tried to read them all as one continuous story written by the exact same person, you would think the author was completely unhinged.
It would make zero logical sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this 6 lenses framework acts like our Dewey Decimal System for meaning. It categorizes the specific kind of truth we are actually looking at.
That's a great way to put it, and we should probably establish clear definitions for these lenses before we go any further, just so you, the listener, understand the tools we are working with today.
Definitely. Let's start with the first few.
So, the science lens interrogates the text's relationship to physical history and observable phenomena.
Right.
Then philosophy examines its underlying logic regarding suffering, ethics, and meaning.
And then there's psychology, which maps its incredibly raw portrayals of human identity, the ego, and our defensive responses to fear.
Exactly. And then we get into the slightly more abstract territory. Mysticism looks at the direct, unmediated experience of the divine.
Like those moments that just bypass the intellect entirely.
Precisely. Metaphysics asks the grand questions about what the text claims regarding the ultimate nature and architecture of reality itself.
And finally, the everyday living lens, which I love.
It's crucial.
It grounds all of this abstract thought right into the dirt. It's the practical, messy application of how we actually treat our neighbors, manage our money, and structure our societies.
And when you overlay all 6 of these lenses, you get the ultimate diagnostic tool for the human condition.
It stops being a book about ancient history.
Right, and it starts acting as a mirror reflecting the current state of our own minds.
So using this new Dewey Decimal System for meaning, we really have to start where the text starts, right, at the foundational rupture.
Yes. To understand how this library categorizes truth, we turn to the very first pages, which is Genesis.
And this is exactly the spot where the reading experience usually just completely derails for modern audiences.
Oh, almost instantly.
Because they are immediately looking through the wrong lens.
The derailment happens because modern readers instinctively bring a purely scientific expectation to an ancient cosmological framework.
They want a science textbook.
Right. But if we try to look through Bandra's science lens here, we have to recognize a categorical error. Genesis is not attempting to provide a 13.8 billion year mechanism for evolutionary biology or, plate tectonics.
Right.
Science investigates the physical mechanisms of the universe through observation, measurement, and testing. But the biblical text is operating in a completely different category of human inquiry.
It's addressing meaning, purpose, and the underlying order of consciousness.
Exactly. The conflict really only arises when readers demand that ancient poetry perform the heavy lifting of modern astrophysics.
It's so unfair to the text, honestly. And it completely misses the point.
It does.
So if we, take off the astrophysics lens and put on the metaphysics lens, we suddenly see that the text is actually making a deeply radical, countercultural claim for its specific historical moment.
It isn't a textbook at all. It is a protest document.
A protest document. I love that.
And that shifts the entire perspective, because to see just how subversive Genesis was, you really have to look at the cultural air the original audience was breathing.
Right, the surrounding empires.
Yes. At the time, the dominant competing creation narrative of the ancient Near East was the Babylonian myth known as the Enuma Elish.
Kind of like the foundational epic of that whole civilization.
Precisely. In that worldview, existence was portrayed as the accidental byproduct of a chaotic, bloody war between petty deities.
Wow.
Specifically, the god Marduk violently tears the sea goddess Tiamat in half to create the sky and the earth.
So wait, the literal foundation of reality, like the architectural blueprint of the universe, is a cosmic homicide.
A cosmic homicide. That is the baseline. And humanity is created essentially out of the blood of a vanquished god, designed purely as an afterthought.
Just a total accident.
Yeah, we were created to do the grunt work, digging irrigation canals, feeding the deities, just because the gods were too lazy to maintain the world themselves.
We were just like biological machines built for divine labor.
Exactly. Now, consider the psychological implications of that for a second.
Oh, it must have been terrifying.
If you are a citizen living under the Babylonian Empire, your underlying psychological baseline is cosmic anxiety.
Because you are inherently disposable.
Yes, you are a slave to violent, unpredictable forces. So, against that horrific backdrop, Genesis steps up to the microphone and makes a massive metaphysical leap.
It claims that existence does not emerge from violence or divine negligence.
Right. It flows from a single, ordered, intentional source.
Yeah.
And furthermore, it introduces this unprecedented concept that humanity possesses actual moral agency.
So metaphysically, this suggests humans possess a unique consciousness, like a capacity for relational depth.
We are framed as stewards, embedded within a living, breathing community of creation. We are not slaves doing grunt work.
And we are not owners extracting resources from the dead mechanical universe either.
No, we are partners in maintaining order. And this sets up the original psychological state of humanity in the text, which is described with this, well, this beautiful, haunting phrase.
Naked and unashamed.
Yes, naked and unashamed.
Let's apply Bandra's psychology lens to that phrase because it is just so much deeper than simply a lack of clothing in a garden.
Oh, absolutely.
Psychologically, naked and unashamed represents a pre-divided consciousness. There's a state of pure presence.
Right. There is no internal monologue evaluating your worth.
There's no measuring your superiority against someone else or,
Yeah.
anticipating rejection.
It is the human mind before the invention of judgment.
But then, that harmonious, unified state shatters.
It does, and the mechanism of that shattering is what the tradition commonly calls the fall. The moment humanity seizes the knowledge of good and evil.
Okay, I want to stop here and completely dismantle how this story is usually taught because the conventional Sunday school reading frames this as humans simply breaking an arbitrary rule.
Right, the shiny red button.
Exactly. It's presented as if this cosmic dictator put a shiny red button in a room, said, whatever you do, don't press the button, and they pressed it.
And then they were punished for a petty fruit infraction.
It feels incredibly shallow and honestly pretty petty.
Well, it is shallow because it treats a profound psychological metaphor as a literal legal infraction. The text isn't describing a minor theft.
Right.
It is illustrating a catastrophic shift in human consciousness. By seizing the knowledge of good and evil, the human mind assumes the authority to judge.
It begins to categorize reality through strict dualities.
Yes. Suddenly, the unified world is fractured into good versus evil, superior versus inferior, the self versus the other.
The mind completely divides.
And the immediate casualty of that division is vulnerability.
And you see the behavioral fallout instantly. Like the very moment they cross this cognitive threshold into dualistic thinking, they realize they are naked and their immediate reaction is terror.
Pure terror.
They frantically try to construct coverings out of fig leaves and they hide in the trees. Looking at this through the psychological lens, this has to be the earliest recorded documentation of imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That is a fascinating application of the concept.
Right, because they suddenly feel deeply inadequate and exposed, so they construct an artificial front.
The fig leaves.
Yeah, the fig leaves, to protect themselves from being truly seen by the divine or even by each other.
Their ego has just been born.
The birth of the defensive ego. And notice the sequence of events when they are finally confronted. The man doesn't take responsibility.
Not at all.
He immediately blames the woman. And by extension, he actually blames the divine source. He says, the woman you put here with me, she gave me the fruit.
He is totally weaponizing his defense mechanism.
And then the woman blames the serpent. It is just this frantic, desperate blame shifting to protect their newly fragile sense of self.
The initial consequence of this fractured consciousness isn't a punitive lightning bolt from the sky.
Rob.
The consequence is pure, unchecked defensiveness. The internal harmony is just gone. And what is crucial for you, the listener, to grasp here is that this defensiveness born in the garden cannot be contained.
It doesn't stay isolated in the human-divine relationship, right?
No, it instantly infects human-to-human relationships. As soon as you have a divided comparative consciousness, violence transitions from a mere possibility to a mathematical inevitability.
A mathematical inevitability. Wow. The system is just fundamentally infected.
And we see that play out with brutal speed in the very next generation with Cain and Abel.
We do. The first murder recorded in this sprawling library doesn't happen over a scarcity of resources or like a border dispute.
No, it happens over comparison and status.
Cain and Abel both offer sacrifices, and Cain perceives that Abel's is favored.
And the ego of Cain feels existentially threatened by the success of his brother.
And the only solution this fractured defensive mind can conceive to eliminate that threat to its status is literal elimination,
It kills him.
which leads to one of those chilling questions ever recorded. When confronted, Cain asks, "Am I my brother's keeper?"
That question just haunts the rest of the text.
It does, because the entire remainder of the biblical library effectively serves as a multi-century argument, answering that exact question with a resounding yes.
Yes, you are completely intertwined with your neighbor.
But the ego fundamentally rejects this.
Of course. The ego hates interconnectedness because it requires vulnerability.
So the ego just scales up its defensiveness even further, taking us from the individual level to the societal level. Which brings us to the Tower of Babel.
Babel is a really fascinating pivot point, especially if we view it through the everyday living lens.
Because on a surface level reading, humanity is just organizing a construction project.
Right, they are just building a tall piece of architecture. The text isn't arguing that architecture, urbanization, or human cooperation are inherently evil things.
No, the technology isn't the issue at all. The danger lies in the underlying psychology driving the technology.
Exactly. At Babel, human cooperation is weaponized for self-glorification.
They literally declare, "Let us make a name for ourselves."
It is an empire seeking to secure its own permanence by enforcing absolute homogenization.
They want everyone speaking the exact same language, unified under one monolithic identity, effectively erasing all diversity and difference.
It is the ultimate manifestation of institutional pride. It is intelligence completely stripped of wisdom, which only serves to make destruction more efficient.
Because you can use organizational intelligence to cure diseases and build aqueducts.
Sure, but that exact same cognitive machinery can be used to build massive empires of exploitation.
And the text is arguing that when the fractured ego operates at scale, seeking to homogenize humanity and conquer the heavens on its own arrogant terms, it eventually collapses under the weight of its own ambition.
The communication breaks down, the society fragments, and they just scatter. It's a recurring historical pattern.
Okay, so this establishes the macro problem perfectly. The consciousness of humanity is completely divided, deeply defensive, and prone to scaling its violence to the point of societal collapse.
That's the baseline.
So if that is the baseline, how does this vast literary project propose actually fixing a structurally broken world? Like, what is the mechanism for repair?
Well, the text answers that macro problem by executing this brilliant narrative maneuver. It actually abandons the macro entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't propose a global philosophical treatise to fix the whole world at once. Instead, it radically narrows its focus down to one highly dysfunctional microfamily.
The patriarchs.
Exactly. This introduces the messy generational mechanics of covenant, beginning with a man named Abraham.
And this is where the expectation of reading a polite novel really ruins the experience.
Oh, completely.
Because if you approach this expecting a pristine religious rulebook filled with perfect saints, the behavior of these founding figures is completely baffling.
They are deeply, deeply flawed.
But philosophically, Abraham serves as the archetype of departure.
He receives a call to leave his inherited cultural beliefs, his political safety, his literal country, and his family of origin, all in order to discover what is actually true.
Which is, I mean, the absolute prerequisite for any true psychological or spiritual awakening. You have to leave the familiar, inherited structures that built your ego.
You have to step into the unknown. But as you pointed out, Abraham is not a flawless vessel of morality.
Not at all. He constantly operates out of fear and self-preservation.
Right. When he travels to Egypt and later to Gerar, he lies about his wife, Sarah.
Telling foreign rulers she is his sister, so they won't kill him to take her. And he does this twice.
Twice. He also engages in a deeply toxic, exploitative dynamic with his wife's servant, Hagar, resulting in the birth of Ishmael, whom he eventually casts out into the desert.
The text just refuses to airbrush him. It presents a profoundly broken human being.
Because the text is making a point. Transformation does not require flawless vessels. Election being chosen by the divine is for service, not for privilege.
Okay, but I have to push back here and push back hard on one specific story in Abraham's life.
Okay, let's hear it.
The binding of Isaac.
Right.
Abraham becomes convinced that he needs to take his beloved son, tie him to an altar, and sacrifice him. He literally raises the knife and is only stopped by divine voice at the absolute last second.
It's a very difficult passage.
I'm sorry, but how on earth can a modern listener engage with this? It's straight up psychological torture. It's horrific.
It is an incredibly terrifying text. It is meant to be disturbing. And to navigate it, Bandra's dual historical and philosophical breakdown is absolutely essential.
Okay, let's break it down.
We have to start historically. In the context of the ancient Near East, child sacrifice was a known, practiced reality.
Really?
Yes, it was considered the ultimate, most potent display of devotion you could possibly offer to a deity.
Wow.
So in that specific geopolitical environment, this story functions as a massive cultural pivot.
How so?
The climax of the narrative, the divine voice stopping the knife, is a definitive, shocking declaration to the ancient world. It says, "This God does not want the blood of your children."
Oh, I see.
It is an explicit, revolutionary rejection of the surrounding cultural norms of violence.
Okay, historically, I can see how that functions as a pivot away from a horrific practice. It sets a new baseline. But philosophically, reading it today, it still feels agonizing.
Of course.
I mean, the trauma inflicted on Isaac in that moment is just unimaginable.
And it should feel agonizing because the philosophy lens extracts a permanent, urgent warning from that exact tension.
A warning about what?
The story isn't just about what happened on a mountain thousands of years ago. It is a permanent warning against the dangers of blind obedience.
Oh, wow.
We must deeply, rigorously question any voice, whether internal or external, that demands cruelty. Even if that voice claims to speak with absolute truth or patriotism or, divine will.
That's so powerful.
The fact that the story takes us right to the razor's edge warns us of the immense dangers of unquestioning religious zeal. Genuine awakening should always move humanity away from cruelty, never toward it.
That is a deeply necessary warning. And, well, the messy mechanics of this family just continue into the next generation.
They certainly do.
We see Jacob, Abraham's grandson, who spends the entire first half of his life as an unrepentant con artist.
He steals his brother's birthright, deceives his blind father, and just runs from the consequences of his manipulation.
Until he is caught alone at night, and he literally wrestles with the divine figure in the dirt until daybreak.
And he walks away with a permanently dislocated hip and a new name, Israel.
Which translates to one who struggles with God.
The psychological implications of that night are staggering. It completely reframes the very concept of faith.
Because for many people, faith is defined as this serene, unquestioning certainty, a peaceful submission.
But Jacob's story redefines faith as a sweaty, difficult, agonizing struggle in the dark. It validates doubt, resistance, and questioning as legitimate, even necessary mechanisms of spiritual growth.
You don't walk away from an encounter with the divine unchanged, but you might walk away with a limp.
Exactly. But the family's moral evolution doesn't really hit its peak until we get to Jacob's son, Joseph.
Right. Up until Joseph, this family has just been passing trauma down from generation to generation like a cursed heirloom.
The brothers are consumed by the exact same ego-driven jealousy we saw with Cain and Abel.
And they literally throw Joseph into a pit and sell him into slavery in Egypt.
But then, through a wild, decades-long sequence of events, Joseph rises to become the second most powerful man in the Egyptian empire.
He controls the global food supply during a massive famine.
And eventually, his abusers, his brothers, show up at his feet begging for food, completely unaware of who he is.
This is a quantum leap in the moral and psychological evolution of the text. Joseph holds absolute, unchecked power over the men who destroyed his childhood.
The entire logic of the fractured defensive mind dictates that he should just crush them. Vengeance is the only logical currency of the ego.
But he refuses to spend it. Instead, he introduces the mechanism of systemic forgiveness.
And we really need to pause and define forgiveness here because the term is heavily abused in modern culture.
Yes, absolutely. Forgiveness in this context is not amnesia. It is not Joseph gaslighting himself into thinking the trauma didn't happen or that it wasn't that bad.
When he finally reveals himself, he whoops so violently the text says the entire palace heard him. He explicitly acknowledges the evil they intended.
Forgiveness, through Bandra's psychology lens, is the conscious refusal to let the original wound dictate the final outcome.
Joseph absorbs the pain, but he refuses to transmit it back as vengeance. By doing so, he short-circuits the machinery of generational trauma.
It is a profound act of psychological liberation. His forgiveness secures the survival of the family, and they are allowed to settle in Egypt.
But as we see repeatedly throughout this library, political safety has a very short shelf life.
Yeah, generations pass, the family multiplies, a new administration takes over, and their status as welcome guests devolves into systemic, brutal enslavement.
The narrative shifts from an intimate family drama into a massive geopolitical and spiritual revolution.
The Exodus.
Yes. And to truly understand the Exodus, we have to analyze the antagonist. We have to analyze Pharaoh.
Right, because Pharaoh is not just a bad historical monarch with a penchant for pyramids.
He is the archetype of the imperial mind. He is the ultimate cold system of control.
He views the world entirely through the lens of extraction, reducing human beings to disposable units of production.
When the enslaved Israelites finally cry out for relief because the work is literally killing them, Pharaoh's response is to demand the exact same quota of bricks, but he removes their resources.
He tells them to go gather their own straw, while maintaining the same level of output. I want to connect this directly to you, the listener.
Please do.
If you are listening to this on your commute, and you have ever felt like your entire worth at your job is tied exclusively to your measurable output, that you are just a number on a spreadsheet, and if you burn out and collapse, you will simply be replaced by another cog in the machine, then you intimately understand the psychology of Pharaoh.
You have encountered the imperial mind.
Yes, it is the defining feature of any system, ancient or modern, that prioritizes output, profit, or efficiency over human dignity.
And it is against this monolithic machinery of extraction that the divine intervenes, calling Moses from the wilderness.
Which leads to the burning bush, where the text drops a profoundly complex metaphysical concept.
Moses asks the voice in the bush for a name, a credential he can take back to the enslaved people. And the response is, I am who I am, or simply, I am.
God identifies as a verb, being itself.
Which is such a sharp, deliberate contrast to the Egyptian pantheon.
It is a direct refutation of Egypt's entire worldview, right?
Exactly. The Egyptian pantheon consisted of noun gods, the god of the sun, the god of the river, the god of the underworld.
And nouns are static. Nouns can be categorized, measured, bribed, and manipulated through magic or sacrifice.
But being itself cannot be objectified. You cannot capture, I am in a stone statue, or confine it to a localized zip code.
Because Pharaoh built his empire by turning living humans into manageable objects. The God of the Exodus reveals a nature that categorically rejects all objectification.
The rigid system of control collides with the uncontainable reality of being, and the system just shatters. The Israelites are physically liberated.
But the text immediately reveals that physical liberation is only the very first step. And this is where the psychological tragedy of the wilderness narrative really sets in.
The text begins to explore the agonizing difference between external freedom and internal freedom.
The physical liberation is instantaneous. They walk through the sea and leave Egypt behind. But the psychological liberation is painfully slow.
The moment they face scarcity in the desert, the moment the water runs out, they immediately experience a collective trauma response. They start romanticizing their captivity.
It is a textbook example of a trauma bond. They literally say to Moses, "At least in Egypt we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted."
They prefer the certainty of enslavement to the uncertainty of freedom.
Because bondage is horrific, but it is predictable. You know exactly what the rules are, even if those rules are breaking your back.
Freedom, on the other hand, is terrifying because it requires profound agency and responsibility.
You can physically walk away from a toxic institution, an abusive relationship, or an oppressive system, but if you do not dismantle the internal frameworks of fear, shame, and dependence, you are still enslaved.
Your body is in the desert, but your mind is still building bricks in Egypt.
Okay, let me stop you there, because I have always struggled with the logistics of what happens next.
Okay, what part?
If the whole point of the Exodus is breaking free from an oppressive system of rules and micromanagement, why is the immediate solution to dump hundreds of incredibly rigid, highly specific laws on these newly free people at Mount Sinai?
The law.
Yeah. They just escaped a system that dictated their every move, and now they are handed a massive list of rules dictating what they can eat, what they can wear, and how to wash their hands. It seems entirely counterintuitive to dump strict laws on people you are trying to teach how to be free.
That is a very common and honestly a valid critique. It feels like replacing one dictator with another.
Right.
But to understand the law given at Sinai, Bandra's framework requires us to view it not as a finalized, perfect morality dropped from the sky, but as the beginning of a developing moral conversation.
Okay, a moral conversation.
Historically, yes, these laws absolutely reflect the patriarchal, tribal assumptions of the ancient Near East. They are a product of their time.
But philosophically?
Philosophically, they introduced radical, unprecedented innovations regarding human dignity. For example, they instituted a mandatory weekly day of rest, the Sabbath, not just for landowners, but for slaves, foreigners, and even working animals.
And in an ancient economy based entirely on continuous agricultural labor, mandating rest for the lowest class of society was completely revolutionary.
Exactly.
Right, and the underlying psychological engine driving this legal code is what fascinates me most. The text constantly repeats this specific refrain. You must not oppress the foreigner because you remember the pain of being foreigners in Egypt.
It is weaponizing trauma for empathy.
Yes. Instead of allowing their past suffering to justify future cruelty, which is what usually happens when oppressed groups gain power, the law demands that the memory of their pain become the exact mechanism that prevents them from victimizing others.
You know what it feels like to be crushed. Therefore, you must never crush another.
It is an incredible psychological ideal.
But empathy grounded in trauma only lasts as long as you remember what it felt like to be powerless.
That's the catch.
What happens when this marginalized, formerly enslaved group finally secures their own borders, builds an economy, and establishes military and political power?
The trajectory of human nature takes over. They look at the surrounding nations, and they immediately demand a king.
And this drives us into the complex era of the kings and the prophets.
They want centralized, coercive power to guarantee their security. They are tired of the vulnerability of freedom.
And the prophet Samuel gives them this blistering geopolitical warning. He says, listen to me, kings are takers.
Centralized power will make you slaves to the state.
A king will take your sons for his armies. He will take your daughters for his kitchens. He will take your best fields for his officials.
But they ignore him.
Yeah.
They want the illusion of safety more than they want the responsibility of freedom.
And Samuel's warning proves utterly prophetic, even with their most celebrated monarch, King David.
David is the golden boy. He is the poet warrior, the one who united the tribes. But once his power becomes absolute, the empathy completely vanishes.
He is completely insulated by his authority. He sees a woman he wants, Bathsheba. He takes her, and when she becomes pregnant, he leverages the machinery of the state to commit murder.
He has her husband, Uriah, intentionally abandoned on the front lines of combat to be killed, just to cover up his own desires.
Empathy is dead, replaced entirely by the ego of the king.
Which introduces the vital, systemic counterbalance in this biblical political system, the prophetic whistleblower.
We must completely redefine what a prophet is in this literature. They are not crystal ball fortune tellers predicting helicopter battles in the 21st century.
They are radical moral awakeners. They are geopolitical whistleblowers, operating precisely in their own present moment, speaking truth to corrupted power.
And the way the prophet Nathan confronts King David about the murder of Uriah is just a masterclass in psychology.
It really is. Nathan knows that if he walks into the throne room and directly accuses the king of murder, David's ego defenses will slam shut immediately.
And Nathan will likely be executed for treason.
So he uses a psychological trap. He bypasses David's defensive ego by telling him a hypothetical story.
He describes a rich man with massive flocks of sheep who steals the single beloved pet lamb of a poor man to feed a passing guest, simply because the rich man didn't want to use his own resources.
David hears this story and is absolutely outraged. His objective sense of justice flares up, and he vehemently demands that the rich man be punished.
And that is the exact moment Nathan springs the trap, points at the king, and says, "You are the man."
It is brilliant. It perfectly illustrates the psychology of projection, how eagerly human beings recognize injustice in others while remaining conveniently blind to our own cruelty.
Prophecy in this text acts as a mirror that forces the powerful to look at their own unvarnished reflection.
And this sets the stage for later prophets like Amos and Isaiah, who take this critique a step further by completely dismantling performative religion.
They look at a highly religious society that performs all the correct temple rituals, sings all the right songs, and offers all the correct sacrifices, while simultaneously exploiting the poor in the courts and rigging the economic scales in the marketplace.
The prophets declare that theology and ritual without compassion and social justice are merely instruments of the ego.
In fact, they argue that performative religion used as a cover for exploitation is actively offensive to God.
But, as is the pattern of history, the kings and the wealthy elites ignore the whistleblowers. The structural rot deepens.
And eventually, the geopolitical hammer falls. The Babylonian Empire rolls in, the city of Jerusalem is besieged, the temple burns to the ground, and the elites are dragged away in chains into foreign exile.
This is the exile, and it represents a total catastrophic collapse of meaning.
It is an existential earthquake. For centuries, the identity of these people rested on three solid pillars: their promised land, their divinely appointed king, and their sacred temple.
When all three of those pillars collapse simultaneously, the immediate psychological crisis is just overwhelming. Everything they believed about their special status is obliterated.
But the paradox of the exile is that this exact destruction forces a profound expansion of consciousness.
Stripped of their institutions, they learn that the sacred isn't trapped in a building.
They are forced to rebuild their fragmented identity not with bricks, but through storytelling, memory, and literature. This period births some of the most profound wisdom literature in human history.
Let's spend some time on that wisdom literature because it is so emotionally raw and incredibly relevant today. The Psalms, for instance, prioritize emotional honesty over toxic positivity.
If you read the Psalms through the psychology lens, they validate the full, messy spectrum of human emotion.
They don't just offer polite prayers. They feature authors literally screaming into the void, expressing rage, despair, and abandonment.
And psychologically, that is the only actual path to health. Denying dark emotions just represses them, turning them into neuroses.
Speaking them out loud, in the assumed presence of the sacred, begins the process of integration and transformation.
Precisely. It is a refusal to sanitize the human experience. And within this broader category of wisdom literature, we find a fascinating philosophical debate occurring between the books of Proverbs and Job.
Proverbs represents the comforting, conventional illusion of retributive justice, essentially karma.
It argues the need equation that if you do good, you will be blessed, and if you do bad, you will be punished. It offers a very predictable, controllable universe.
But the book of Job exists to violently shatter this neat formula.
Job is presented as a perfectly righteous man who loses his wealth, his children, and his health in a series of random tragedies.
And when his friends show up to comfort him, they quickly become the archetype of toxic theology. I actually relate the psychology of Job's friends directly to modern behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Job's friends look at his horrific random suffering, and it terrifies them. Because if a good person can suffer randomly, then they aren't safe. The universe is unpredictable.
So to protect their own fragile sense of safety, they victim blame him. They interrogate Job, insisting he must have committed some secret sin to justify his pain.
And we do this exact same thing today. When someone gets a terrible cancer diagnosis, our first instinct is often to desperately ask if they ate too much sugar, or if they lived near power lines, or if they didn't exercise enough.
We do this because we want a logical reason for their suffering.
Exactly, to assure ourselves that we are safe from random tragedy as long as we just follow the rules. It's entirely self-serving.
It is a profound defense mechanism against the chaos of reality. But the climax of the book, God's answer to Job from the whirlwind, refuses to give Job or his friends the neat moral equation they want.
Instead, it points to a cosmos that is simply too wild, too vast, and too complex for our tiny moral spreadsheets.
It dismantles the arrogance of human certainty and invites Job to find peace within the mystery of a universe he cannot control.
And from the mystery of suffering in Job, we move to the mystery of impermanence in Ecclesiastes.
The author of Ecclesiastes, looking through the philosophy lens, examines human pursuits, wealth, political power, intellectual achievement, and pleasure, and calls all of it hevel,
which translates to vapor or smoke.
The core argument is that human suffering stems primarily from demanding permanent security from temporary things.
We demand that our youth, our careers, our relationships, and our wealth last forever. And when they inevitably change or fade like vapor, we suffer.
Ecclesiastes teaches the detachment of experiencing the vapor without frantically trying to possess it.
Which pairs beautifully with the Song of Songs, a deeply poetic book that explores the sacredness of physical embodiment and desire, while warning against the danger of trying to possess or control the object of your love.
But before we move out of the Old Testament, I want to touch on Jonah, because Jonah is the dark comedy of the ego.
Jonah is a prophet who is told to go preach a message of mercy to his most brutal, terrifying enemies, the Assyrians in the city of Nineveh.
And he runs the opposite direction. But he doesn't run because he is scared of them.
He runs because he knows God is merciful, and he is absolutely terrified that his enemies might actually repent and be forgiven.
It brilliantly exposes how hatred functions as a cheap tool for building a strong identity. We often need our enemies to stay purely evil so we can remain the unquestionable good guys.
Jonah's ego is so attached to his hatred that he would literally rather die than see his enemies experience grace. It is a piercing critique of how the human mind weaponizes self-righteousness.
So we have this massive psychological evolution happening through the literature, which brings us to the first-century powder keg and the inauguration of the kingdom of God.
The exiled people have returned to their land, but they are living under the suffocating, brutal occupation of the Roman Empire.
The historical context here is absolutely vital for understanding everything that follows. The New Testament is essentially a 27-piece Jewish symphony written in a highly pressurized, traumatized environment.
The famous Roman Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome, was just a propaganda term.
It was maintained not by actual peace, but by crushing taxation that stripped farmers of their ancestral lands, widespread debt slavery, and the psychological terror of crucifixion used against anyone who threatened the state.
Into this heavily militarized environment steps a wandering teacher who completely inverts the concept of power.
Jesus steps out and announces the arrival of the kingdom of God.
And in that specific context, announcing a new kingdom isn't just a spiritual metaphor. It implies that Caesar's kingdom is illegitimate.
It is a present tense reality meant to alter power structures now.
But I always ask this vital logistical question when examining this history. If this movement challenged Rome so directly, and Rome was incredibly efficient at crushing rebellion, why didn't the empire obliterate it immediately?
Because Jesus completely subverted the standard revolutionary playbook. Rome was constantly looking for militias, swords, zealots, and armed rebellions.
They knew exactly how to crush physical threats.
But Jesus bypassed Rome's physical defenses by building a revolution at dinner tables. He utilized the everyday living lens to restructure society from the bottom up.
But walk me through the actual mechanics of that, because sitting down for a meal doesn't sound like it's going to topple the most brutal military empire in human history.
It sounds harmless until you understand the social architecture of the first-century Mediterranean world. Meals were not just about caloric intake. They were the ultimate microcosm of social hierarchy.
Where you sat, who you were allowed to eat with, the purity of the food. This was a rigidly enforced map of human worth.
The Romans and the religious elites maintained power by enforcing strict boundaries of class and purity. You do not eat with the poor, you do not eat with sex workers, and you certainly do not eat with tax collectors who collaborate with the empire.
But Jesus shattered those boundaries.
By eating with the untouchables, he redefined human worth outside of the empire's metrics. He reversed society's rigid hierarchies, declaring that the last will be first, shifting the internal architecture of the human heart.
Rome couldn't see the threat because it wasn't an army. It was a contagion of dignity. By the time the empire realized the foundations of its social control were rotting, the movement had already taken root.
And the rule book for this internal revolution is the Sermon on the Mount, which is entirely based on virtue ethics, focusing on character formation rather than mere rule compliance.
The Beatitudes systematically overturned the marketplace values of human worth, blessing the meek, the peacemakers, and the merciful. And this is where the background malware analogy perfectly explains the mechanism of what he was teaching.
Tell us about that.
Well, the text demands that you love your enemies, and instinctively, our ego hates that. It sounds weak. But think about what holding on to hatred actually does to your mind.
It consumes you.
It is exactly like having malicious background malware running constantly on your computer's CPU. You think you are targeting your enemy by obsessing over their downfall. But all you're doing is draining your own battery, fragmenting your own hard drive, and overheating your own motherboard.
While the person you hate isn't even logged onto the same network.
Exactly. They might be sleeping soundly while you're destroying yourself. Refusing to hate your enemy is not about letting them off the hook. It is refusing to install their malware in your brain.
It is the ultimate refusal to let the abuser's tactics clone themselves inside the mind of the victim. But you cannot teach these radical truths directly to people.
If you just state them as facts, you trigger a fight-or-flight response from the listener's ego. The ego throws up defenses.
So the text uses parables as stealth weapons to bypass those defenses. Consider the parable of the Good Samaritan.
A legal expert asks Jesus to define the exact boundaries of who he is required to love. Who is my neighbor?
Instead of giving a legal answer, Jesus tells a story that shifts the entire question. The story forces the listener to ask, will I bypass my ingrained in-group bias, my racial prejudice, and my religious purity laws to care for a suffering enemy?
Or look at the parable of the prodigal son. We focus on the younger brother who runs away, but the true target of the story is the elder brother who stays home.
It exposes how strict rule following can often be driven by deep resentment and a transactional desire to control the father's love rather than actual affection.
Parables invite the listener into a narrative house, let them get comfortable, and then lock the door and spring the moral trap.
And alongside parables, we have the accounts of miracles. Now, we look through Bandra's science lens. It's easy for a modern, empirical mind to dismiss these as simple magic tricks or myths.
But modern fields like psychoneuroimmunology are increasingly showing the deep, measurable biological links between belief, community connection, and physical healing.
The mind and the body are profoundly intertwined. But regardless of the physical mechanisms, the philosophical purpose of these healings is what matters most.
Jesus uses these healings to violently sever the ancient and honestly still prevalent toxic link between illness and moral failure.
He repeatedly encounters sick people and refuses the cultural assumption that they or their parents sinned to deserve their suffering. He restores them not just to health, but to social belonging.
Which brings us to the core mechanics of grace in this library, beginning with three heavily burdened words that have accumulated a lot of historical baggage: sin, repentance, and forgiveness.
If we examine the original language, sin, or hamartia in Greek, does not originally mean a stain on your soul that makes you worthless.
It is an archery term that simply means missing the mark. It is about estrangement, distortion, and failing to act out of love.
Repentance, or metanoia, literally translates to changing the mind or shifting your perspective. And psychologically, we must differentiate toxic shame, the paralyzing belief that I am fundamentally a bad person, from healthy remorse.
Which says, I caused harm, I recognize it, and I must take action to repair it.
And forgiveness, as we saw with Joseph, is fundamentally an internal liberation.
It is cutting the energetic cord to the abuser, refusing to let their worst action be the ultimate truth of their identity, and refusing to let it dictate your future.
But this entire path of radical forgiveness inevitably collides with the ultimate violence of the empire, resulting in the crucifixion.
The cross is the ultimate exposure of what anthropologist René Girard called the scapegoat mechanism, the dark human tendency to unify a fractured, anxious crowd by concentrating all blame and violence onto a single marginalized victim.
The crucifixion is a blinding, unmasking exposure of state terror and religious collusion.
And in the aftermath of that event, the Apostle Paul takes these threads and develops this profound psychological concept of grace, rooted deeply in his understanding of the divided self.
Paul recognized a frustrating truth about human nature. Having the correct moral information is almost never enough to change human behavior.
We often know exactly what is good for us, but we compulsively choose what harms us. The law rules and threats of punishment cannot fix this internal division. It only highlights it.
Grace, therefore, is the concept of unconditional belonging that is given before behavior is corrected. It is the only force powerful enough to melt the defensive ego because it removes the fear of rejection that drives our defensiveness in the first place.
I always have to play devil's advocate regarding this specific definition of grace. It isn't telling people they are unconditionally accepted regardless of what they do. Just give them a massive toxic loophole to act horribly.
It sounds like a license for narcissism.
Like someone could say, I have grace, so I can exploit whoever I want, and I'm still covered.
Paul anticipated that exact objection in his own writings. He argued that true grace produces profound humility and social responsibility, not narcissism.
If someone is using the concept of grace as a loophole to justify abuse or selfishness, they haven't actually experienced grace. They have just found a convenient new religious vocabulary word to defend their unbroken ego.
True grace liberates you from the exhausting fear that your worst action is your permanent identity. And when you are no longer terrified of being exposed, you are finally empowered to take an honest look at your flaws and actually change.
Grace doesn't lower the moral standard. It provides the psychological safety necessary to pursue it.
So if this profound grace is truly internalized, how does it play out in the messy realities of society? According to the text, it starts with agape love, which is framed as the organizing virtue of human existence.
Courage without love is just brutality. Truth without love is just weaponized information. Jesus relentlessly widened the boundaries of belonging, tearing down the us versus them walls that society builds to feel safe.
And this expansive, inclusive ethic violently clashes with the concept of wealth. The text views money with intense, unyielding suspicion.
But synthesizing this through Bandra's everyday living lens, the text seems far less interested in our actual tax bracket or bank account balance, and much more concerned with our emotional and spiritual attachment to it.
Wealth possesses a very real spiritual gravity. It pulls on the human heart. The diagnostic question the text asks is, do the things we own eventually begin to own us?
Generosity, therefore, is not framed merely as a moral duty to help the poor, although it is that. It is framed as a critical practice of reordering desire.
It is a practice of detachment, intentionally breaking the ego's reliance on accumulation for a false sense of safety.
And speaking of confronting systems of false safety and corrupt power, we absolutely have to dismantle the modern misconception surrounding the final book of the library, the Book of Revelation.
Pop culture has turned it into a terrifying crystal ball, predicting 21st century geopolitics, microchips, and helicopter battles in the Middle East.
But looking through the proper historical and literary lenses, it is none of those things. It is apocalyptic resistance literature, written specifically for persecuted, marginalized communities living under the shadow of the Roman Empire.
It uses vivid, trippy, symbolic imagery to unveil the true spiritual character of empire, represented as a beast that consumes the vulnerable and demands absolute worship.
And rather than being a book of terror, it boldly laughs at the empire's illusion of permanence. It reminds the persecuted that the beast will fall and the Lamb will reign.
As we draw this deep dive to a close, we have to pull back and synthesize the journey through these 6 lenses. When you overlay science, philosophy, psychology, mysticism, metaphysics, and everyday living onto this library, they all converge on a few undeniable truths.
They agree on the severe limitations of human perception, the profound danger of the defensive ego and concentrated power, and our deep, inescapable interconnectedness with one another.
And it is important to note that the friction between these lenses, say, the tension between the observable facts of science and the unmediated experiences of mysticism, is incredibly healthy. It is necessary for intellectual honesty.
The text isn't afraid of that friction, and neither should we be. So with thousands of different interpretations, dogmas, and denominations out there, what is the ultimate metric for reading this text correctly?
How do we know if we are using the lenses right? Jesus actually provided a foolproof diagnostic test. By their fruits you will know them.
If a theology or an interpretation of this library produces fear, exclusion, arrogance, or indifference to the suffering of your neighbor, it has missed the mark completely. It is dead.
But if an interpretation produces courage, expansive compassion, and systemic care for the vulnerable, then it is alive and it is functioning as intended.
And we want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to carry with you. We have spent this time applying Joe Bandra's 6 lenses to an ancient library of literature.
But what if you took these exact same 6 lenses and applied them to the story you tell about your own life? Consider your career frustrations, your past traumas, your relational anxieties.
Remember the divine name revealed in Exodus, I am. In its original linguistic context, it translates more accurately to I will be what I will be, a verb in continuous unfolding motion.
The Old Testament is not a locked, dusty book of the past. It is a psychological template for the evolution of consciousness that you are undergoing right now.
What if your life is currently transitioning through its own genesis of chaotic new beginnings? What if you are in the middle of a painful exile, where all your previous structures of meaning have collapsed and you are being forced to find the sacred in the wilderness?
What if you are experiencing your own exodus, breaking free from the internal or external systems that have enslaved you, just waiting for you to find the courage to write the next chapter of your awakening?
It brings us right back to where we started. You cannot read this text, and you cannot read your own life like a polite, continuous, predictable novel. It is a messy, beautiful, agonizing, and ultimately redemptive historical mosaic.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.
We hope it sparked a conversation that awakens something profound within you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might benefit from the conversation. Your support helps us continue exploring the deepest questions of life, consciousness, and reality. I am Julia Carter, and it is my honor to introduce Joe Bandra, author, philosopher, speaker, healthcare technology pioneer, and lifelong explorer of life's questions. Through his writing, Joe bridges science, philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and direct experience in a search for truth. His first book, Finding Nevaeh, is a transformative journey of self-discovery and the search for lasting happiness. His second book, Body, Mind, and Machine, chronicles his remarkable career and the evolution of healthcare technology. His next book, The Nature of Reality, explores consciousness, existence, and the mysteries at the heart of human experience. Joe's work invites us to look beyond what we think we know and awaken to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit.
Life often feels like an endless list of tasks, constant noise and distractions, pulling us in every direction. We're all searching for happiness, but what if we've been looking in the wrong places all along?
This was Nevaeh's journey. Lost in the noise, she felt cut off from the peace and happiness she longed for, until she met Joe Bandra, an unconventional, insightful philosopher with a different perspective. Jay, as he is simply known, didn't hand her a map. He gave her something far more valuable, a compass, a way to turn inward, navigate her own thoughts, and uncover the clarity hidden beneath the chaos.
Readers around the world have been touched and inspired by Finding Nevaeh.
Your journey to inner peace begins now. Get your copy of Finding Nevaeh, available on Amazon and at findingnevaeh.org, or listen to the audiobook on Audible, Spotify, Apple, and other platforms.